Welcome to the Launchpad Podcast powered by ACTO, the Commercialization Cloud for life sciences. The Launchpad highlights change agents working to disrupt life sciences and their strategies for success in the ever-changing post-market promotion landscape. In this episode, Parth Khanna, CEO of ACTO, speaks with Bill Seitz, VP of Sales and Marketing in Monaghan Medical. They discuss how Monaghan maintains truth in advertising and how Monaghan was able to win the American Association for Respiratory Care's Zenith Award for the 5th year in a row.
Hello, welcome to our very first podcast. This podcast is about helping you promote on clinical value. We all know healthcare systems are changing. It's getting more challenging than ever to get new patient-centric technologies to market and create that big impact. That being said, there are some leaders and companies that really stand out. And we want to know what they're doing differently and what are the innovators and the movers and shakers of the industry, how they're thinking and creating that impact. I'm really excited to share that we have one such leader today with us, Bill Seitz from Monaghan Medical. Monaghan is at the cutting edge of promoting on clinical value, and Bill brings over 2 decades of experience in sales leadership roles. So it is my pleasure and honor to have my friend here.
Thank you.
Bill, thank you for being with us and sharing your insights. I would love to start off by just learning more about who Bill is and what is it that you do at Monaghan Medical.
Well, thank you. Appreciate you coming to my office today in Kansas City here. So as you said, Parth, we've been in business for quite some time at Monaghan Medical, specializing in respiratory care devices. And me personally, I've been in the business, as you mentioned, for over 2 decades. So I bring some experience, and I think I've learned a few things along the way. And I serve as an officer and vice president of sales and marketing at Monaghan Medical.
Excellent. Great, Bill. And it is my pleasure to be here in Kansas City. I'm looking forward to the barbecue later on, obviously.
Yes, no doubt. Absolutely.
And Bill, I think that would be a great place to start. We mentioned, 2 decades of experience. Obviously, there is so much that has changed over the last 2 decades. When we look at how providers think, how payers think, and obviously patients as the demographics change. Would love to learn from you on a high level. What are some of the big shifts that you've seen change over the last couple of decades and more recently, perhaps?
Yeah, well, you're right. And we've gone from a model of activity-based, procedural-based to outcome-based over the last particularly 5 to 7 years or so. The industry's focusing more on outcomes and value as opposed to activities. And that's the biggest change. And so what it's done, and it's been a good change for companies like Monaghan, is it focuses on outcomes, evidence, peer-reviewed data, and things that we focused on prior to those changes in the marketplace. So it kind of worked to our benefit to some degree, where we can talk about high-level outcomes, evidence quality, as opposed to day-to-day transactional things that a lot of the competitors, I think, may have been focusing on too much.
Got it. Well, thank you for sharing that, Bill. Honing a little bit more on that. So when we talk about focusing on clinical data and outcomes, to the folks in the field, how do you imagine that that impacts their roles to where the rubber meets the road? For example, where a sales rep is detailing to a provider.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. That's been the biggest, I think, transition for companies, and people in my role, I think, have to focus on that issue particularly. What's happened is it's become more complex. So the buyer, the recipient of the information is more complex. They're more engaged, and they are focusing more on the bigger picture. It's not a feature and benefit sale. It's not you walk in with a piece of literature and feature and benefit, and you walk out and you have an order. It's much more complex. There's many more buyers and stakeholders involved with different interests. So it's gone beyond calling on my buddy in the particular department that I'm used to calling on, and it's expanded to a much more complex sale that's based on value and delivering a message that's tailored to that specific customer, that's the biggest difference that I think people in my role should focus on is how do you get to that message and that type of a complex sales rep. That's the big difference.
Great. Thanks again, Bill. Like you said, obviously this is a good change for the healthcare system on its own, and it really helps discern or delineate the folks that have been promoting on clinical value and outcomes from the ones that are not, because now it's tied to their commercial success. I understand Monaghan has recently been recognized by the American Association for Respiratory Care with the Zenith Award now for 5 years in a row. Can you tell us more about that award?
Yeah, gladly. So we're extremely proud of that, and the main reason we're so proud of that award is it's from the customer. And so how we receive that, and we're so fortunate to be able to get awarded this Zenith Award 5 consecutive years, was the American Association for Respiratory Care, called the AARC. They have about 47,000 members across the United States.
Wow.
They submit a ballot about 2 months before their international Congress meeting each year in December, which includes 350 companies in our space, in the respiratory space, that participate in some way in hospitals. So the ballot's quite long. There's 350 companies. Each member is asked to vote for a company that best represents a number of quality things: quality of the sales reps, quality of the products, truth in advertising, support. So it's things that we care about and we focus on, but it's great to hear from customers that they value it and believe we're doing a great job. So again, this last year in New Orleans at the Congress in New Orleans, earlier this month, we were the number one company, and this would be 5 years in a row we've been the recipient of the award. So we're quite proud of that, and our entire company is a contributor to that award for sure.
That's amazing. Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
It's a big testament to you and your team in embodying all these values that we're talking about, and leading the shift and responding to the shift in healthcare. So Bill, let's say, stepping in the shoes of, let's say I'm a VP of sales, stepping into this new role, coming into a commercial organization that today still has the legacy mindset, let's say, of maybe promoting on relationships, or dare I say incentives, right? And I'm coming into this role. I want to shake things up. Let's say my CEO is behind me, and they are investing in generating a lot of clinical data, peer-reviewed evidence-based research. So I have the tools at my disposal. Where do I start? What advice would you give a VP of sales coming into a role like this?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and it's a somewhat complex. But as you know, we've been a very early adopter of the ACTO technologies, and what it did for us was it provided a way for us to take this complex world, a number of data points, and consolidate it and organize them in a way that we knew we could manage and deliver consistent training, quality. The messaging was going to be on point, and we were going to not only be able to put it in one spot and train and deliver it, but we were also going to be able to monitor the success of that training and how effective it was. For a company like Monaghan, we have over 400 peer-reviewed studies.
Wow.
So imagine a new sales representative comes in and they're managing an area, and they're looking at a pile of 400 studies. Well, it's impossible. We don't expect them to be physicians,
right.
But we do expect them to master the talking points and the value proposition, and how we position the products that are of value to whatever stakeholder they're talking to. So whether it's a clinician or a respiratory therapist, a physician, a post-op nurse, or a purchasing person who cares a lot about the economics of their decisions. They have to be able to master that that presentation and value proposition to that particular person. And that was really what I saw back years ago when we adopted ACTO. It was the way for us to put it all together in one spot that we could manage it, and it's worked great.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Bill. So essentially, the importance of training and importance of consolidating that clinical and brand story, as I understand, and being able to pulse that out, that seems to be important.
Yeah.
Let's say if there was a company, so going back into the shoes of our VP of sales, who's coming in supercharged up, what advice would you give them to create that confluence in the back end between the different stakeholders? For example, sales, marketing, compliance, commercial learning and development, and compliance, of course. Let's start with marketing, because they play a very important role. What advice would you give this VP of sales that they can go to marketing, and what kind of conversations should they be having around creating that consistency in the field?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is create a compelling message. And so once you have the compelling message and the deliverables and what the value proposition looks like, and it's the same set of facts. That's the one thing I think that the other leaders I think should focus on is it's the same set of facts tailored to a value proposition to meet that audience. So you're not recreating a bunch of stories and facts. You're using the same set of facts in a different way for that person and that audience. So a director of purchasing or materials management, or a VP or a CFO of a hospital system may not want to talk about particle size of a drug and how that particular drug particle works and where it ends up in the lungs, but they do care about the economics of the decision that the respiratory and the clinical people are making. And so the same set of facts, the same of our 400 studies, we have, I think, found a good way to provide value propositions for all that data in a consolidated way that's concise, and it's based on who the recipient is. So for other leaders, once you have this compelling message, find a way to put it in a simple format that's repeatable. You can deliver it over and over and over again, whether the person's there for 15 years or whether they're brand new rep. They can come in with the same set of information, use the same tools, have the same access to it very simply. And that's what we've done. And whether somebody's been here for a month or whether they've been here for 15 years, like some of our veteran reps, they're using the same set of facts.
That's right. And that makes sense. It's essentially, from what I understand, Bill, the nucleus of what you're saying is consistent despite the channel in which the message is being delivered, because as I understand, that's coming from the clinical data and the evidence supporting the product. And then you're tailoring that to each channel. So for example, if it's someone from procurement, they care more about the financial aspects of that story, which is still the same story. It's a clinical and brand story, and how it would drive value. Thank you for sharing that, Bill. Switching gears a little bit more and going back out into the field. So going from the HQ all the way to the front lines. In your years, I'm sure you've seen hundreds and if not thousands, it'll probably be close to thousands of reps come in through the door, and some come in, some survive, and then some sink. But then there are ones that really, really thrive. What would you say is the X factor in today's commercial landscape, in today's healthcare landscape, that delineates the all-stars from, maybe the B- and B players and also the C players?
Yeah. Well, we're all A players at Monaghan, but in all seriousness, the star players, your A+ players, every company has hopefully 10% of those that excel and do things extraordinarily well and different. They usually have some common traits, but they're different people. There's no one set personality type or any one trait that I think is consistent among, when I've seen star players over the years, they've all had the same, that some are quiet, some are more outspoken, some are come across a little bit more forward, some are more, reserved. So it's not one personality type, but they have some things in common. And probably the biggest thing that stars have in common is they understand their audience. And so when I'm talking to, whether it's talking to Parth, the CEO of a company, or I'm talking to a janitor in a hospital, that person is very clear that I'm listening to them. I care about them, and I'm going to speak to them in a way that they feel that I'm receptive to whatever their needs are. So when a rep goes in and is talking to whether it's a surgeon, a respiratory care director, or a person on the floor that's doing a lot of the day-to-day work, it's very important that they understand that person's needs and address them, and it's genuine, and that's the thing. They want to do it. They're passionate about it. They want to do it, and it comes across. It's very clear when those people talk that they care about what they're doing.
Great. Thank you, Bill, for sharing that. Going back to our previous discussion, in advancing that multifaceted promotion and fueled obviously by the rep's own personal passion and assuming that they have the will and they want to go out there, make a difference, they bring that patient first mindset. What can other teams within a company do to help? For example, what can, in your view, how can marketing, compliance, and commercial learning, how can they help sales move the ball towards the end zone?
That's a great question. Now, most salespeople don't like anything that distracts them from sales. And so anything regarding compliance or paperwork or expenses or any of those things are considered a distraction to a lot of reps. So what I always have tried to keep in mind is minimize the things that distract them from what they want to do, which is being in front of customers.
That's right.
And developing those relationships. So the easier and simpler and more concise you can make all those things, the better it is. And so like, in our case with ACTO particularly, how we put everything in one platform, whether it's compliance or training or ongoing monitoring how people are running the devices and uploading new talking points about new studies, has streamlined it all. So it's a way for us to get it out there very simply. It's consistent. It's not dependent upon the manager delivering the same message across the country to all the different reps. It's all in one spot. We know exactly what the message is. We can update it very quickly, and that's, frankly, why we're fans of the technology.
Great. Thank you. Obviously, that's music to our ears. And, contextualizing this for leaders out there that may not have invested in that technology, I guess the takeaway here is that on the back end, what we can do as teams or leaders is create those approval workflows. And to your point earlier on consolidation, we're doing the heavy lifting on the back end. So folks in the field, they can do what they do best, which is engage the providers and deliver the message and create value. And promote on value. So we've done that consolidation approvals and put it in one place. So if I'm a rep in the parking lot waiting to go call on a surgeon, let's say, I have the confidence that the message or the real world evidence I'll be citing is the current, and it enables me for success.
And accurate. So I've had to use the example before. We've had a fantastic study that we had published about a year ago, real world evidence of airway clearance. And it was an 810 patient study and about the outcomes of those patients delivered. And I've used the example before, we reduced readmission rates. And so is that number 28% or is it 29%? Doesn't seem important, but I would rather look at my phone and pull up my talking points on the app and make sure it's 28 before I go tell them it's 29.
That's right.
And that 1%, you lose credibility, even though it's not, maybe doesn't appear to be important. To be factually accurate and on point every time is really, really critical, because that's where the trust. They believe that our team is delivering accurate, truthful, factual information. It's very important, and that's why those type of things are very critical.
That's right.
Yeah.
Bill, thank you for sharing that story, and it stimulates another thought in my mind, which is around what is unique in life sciences in particular than any other industry. We find is the sheer distance, the knowledge distance between the buyer and the sales rep, where you have these domain experts, subject matter experts, surgeons, physicians. They have decades of more experience than a sales rep does, especially as the demographics of the field sales organizations, they change, where folks are, they may just have a bachelor degree, and now they're going and working for a medical device company or a pharma company. If you were talking to one today, a rep like that today, who is bright-eyed and ready to go, what advice would you give them as they enter the workforce or the field force?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing is that hopefully you got into this business, life sciences, medical device business, because you're passionate about doing something different. And I fresh out of college, I sold computers and copiers, like a lot of sales reps do. And while it was great training ground, I wasn't quite passionate about what type of copier they bought. Whereas in this business, which I've been in for almost 25 years, you really feel like it's an important venture you're taking on every day. So when you go out, not only should you have that passion, hopefully they all do that, get into this business, but you are considered a resource by your customers. So you should really be, that should be your goal, to go out as a new rep trying to make their way. How do I become a resource? So when they think of something in my space, they call me. They should want to call me if they have a question. They should not want to call my competitor. And if you become that resource, and you only become that resource by being consistent, truthful, reliable, consistent, and provide value. If you don't provide value, you'll never become that resource they rely on. And that's what we try and get all of our field territory managers, sales reps to become, is that resource for their hospitals.
Absolutely. And Bill, as you share that, I'm thinking, well, it's no surprise that you won the Zenith Award 5 years in a row, because it's that embodiment of those values across every ladder of the value chain. That's fantastic. Final question here, Bill. Over the last 3 years, I've had the honor and privilege of talking to so many leaders like yourselves. We've talked to over 1,000 life sciences companies as we've worked to design our technology. And one thing that has always stood out to me about you is you're always challenging the status quo, always thinking outside the box. So as we wrap things up here, I'd love to know what's cooking in Bill's lab today.
Well, I can't give away all my secrets, but I will say I appreciate that. I do think that the status quo and the way things have been in the past don't necessarily have to dictate what you're doing tomorrow, which is, as you know, we were one of the early adopters to this type of technology where we streamline, and that was foreign to our company at the time. So in the past, we would, do things like send out a big packet of information to everyone's home along with a memo describing how to learn it. And so things like that, I just found were not efficient. And we're going to continue to push to find ways to streamline all these learnings, communications, relationships. And everything should be focused on providing more value to our customers, and that's so anything along those lines is what I'm focused on. But other than that, we are keeping plowing forward, and hopefully we'll have continued success.
Great, and here's to another 5 more years of Monaghan winning the Zenith Award.
We hope. Yeah, we hope.
And thank you for your insights today. It's going to go a long way with leaders that are looking at this complex, ever-changing landscape and wanting to do the right thing, wanting to put patients first. And we admire all the great work you and your teams do. And with that, we've wrapped up our first podcast. click the subscribe button. Lots more insights coming from great leaders like Bill that are helping lead the shift towards value-based care in healthcare.
If you found value in our podcast and know of a change agent who is working to disrupt the life sciences industry, please nominate them using the form below.